Yeah, I think the top trends in DEI right now are kind of starting to spread in two directions. So one is very much around systems. So how do you build mechanisms to help reduce bias in interviewing, in hiring, in promotions, and kind of everyday interactions. The other is very much around, in some ways, kind of personalizing the experience. And so removing bias in some of those places is about removing identifying characteristics from resumes and removing names and really kind of leveling the playing field. The other is more about understanding people's backgrounds in order to be able to create a more equitable experience for them. So those are two things that are absolutely happening right now, and things like artificial intelligence are continuing to support that trend. The biggest concern about bias in artificial intelligence is that notion that our computers and our algorithms are only going to be kind of perpetuating some of the same things that we have created. And so I don't know if that's better or worse than them creating things on their own that we hadn't ever envisioned, but in a lot of ways it is a matter of who is creating the artificial intelligence, what are the systems that are going into it, and how is it being trained, because in a lot of ways, and we've seen this with some, whether it's camera recognition, not recognizing darker faces, or resume review looking for particular characteristics that may be more connected to a specific gender. If we tell it that we know what good leadership looks like, and good leadership looks like what it has always looked like for the past 50, 60, 100, 200 years, then it's just going to perpetuate that same bias. I think that there is a lot of attention being paid right now through the lenses of things like social psychology and behavioral economics to understand some of that bias. And so if we can marry those things together, but not believe that artificial intelligence is going to solve everything or humans are going to solve everything, but really finding the marriage of those things, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to create better outcomes. I would say Akamai has done that's been incredibly effective has been a bit of twofold. One has been, there have been some programs, and there's something that we ran for many years called the Akamai Technical Academy that was a very dedicated and kind of focused program that was run out of our former diversity and inclusion office. There's actually a Harvard business case study about it. I was actually just in Cambridge a little while ago teaching it with one of the professors. But that was very much focused on, this is a program that is coming out and run out of the diversity and inclusion office, and it was about taking people from backgrounds that maybe didn't have a STEM background, but they had the analytical skills, and then giving them the training and the support to then be able to join and start a career with Akamai. So that's one arm of something, right, where you're really dedicated, you're really focused on that particular space. The other one that I think is far more scalable and arguably less expensive is empowering our employees. And so when we think about our employee resource groups, when we think about some of the programs that we run, we've been very deliberate about bringing employees into that and saying, you all are the ones that are benefiting from this. You all are the ones that have incredible ideas. We are behind the scenes. We are what I would argue good leaders should be, which is largely invisible, removing obstacles, supporting people, engaging people. And just recently I was looking at one of our internal chats in our Out at Akamai community, which is our LGBTQIA+ community. That employee resource group was saying, wow, we've accomplished so much over the past year. We've accomplished more than we thought we could. And I saw my team's fingerprints on so many of the things that they were doing, but that group wasn't pointing back to my team and saying, look at all the work that's been done. They were looking at themselves. And so whether it was new policies, new procedures, new programs that had been launched, they knew we were a part of it, but they were excited about the work that they had done. And I think that's a thing that HR teams can do, is to get out of the way and recognize that we're at our best when we're empowering our employees. And when they have that sense of ownership, it is fundamentally different. And for all of us that are trying to create that sense of connection and that stickiness to the company, when you've developed something and you're incredibly proud of it, you're probably not going anywhere unless there's a massive pull. In the 2.5 years that I've been at Akamai, one of the biggest challenges has been, it's something we talk about quite often, it's the intent versus the impact. We are incredibly fortunate, and I know not every organization is, that our senior leaders are emotionally and intellectually committed to doing this work. That doesn't always translate into movement or measurement or actions, right? And so it's almost like being a really passionate gardener. I would love to grow great fruit. I don't do it all that well. And so my intentions are there, but my actions are not manifesting in things that I can actually eat. And so when we look at the organization, what we're saying is, okay, some of this is actually about dialing back some of the energy. It's about actually translating some of those things into systems and procedures and mechanisms that may not be as flashy or as interesting, but they're actually way more important. So when we overhaul the way that we interview or overhaul the way that we put out job descriptions, we bring in more candidates from underrepresented backgrounds, we open up that aperture and invite more people in. That's not something that you can maybe feel, right? In the same way that if we trained a bunch of leaders on inclusive hiring, they might say, great, now I'm a much better interviewer. Thank you, Khalil and the inclusion, diversity, and engagement team. But if we fix those things on the back end, it's almost like, in a city where you're fixing the roads and the stoplights and all of those things versus just giving everybody a new car. So we're doing some of the things that are actually creating better infrastructure, but those don't always manifest in good feelings. And so that's one of the biggest challenges, is just to continue to convey that value. And similarly, when we're doing our jobs really well, it's almost like a doctor that keeps their patients healthy, and then the patients start to say, well, why do I need the doctor? I'm always healthy, right? You can be too good at your own role, and I've got an incredible team of people that are consulting and supporting and making sure that folks feel really great about the work that's happening at a time like now when budgets start to come down and priorities start to shift. You can look and say, well, we've got a great culture. Why do we still need to focus over here, without recognizing that we have a great culture for now, but there's no such thing as a static culture. It's always in some degree of flux, and it's either getting better or it's getting worse. And if we stop investing, it will get worse. And so it can lull us into a false sense of security to get lots of awards, to see lots of recognition, to get great feedback from our employees. So it's incredibly important that we are both out of the way, but also visible, and that we're doing great work, but also feel needed. And finding that balance can be really tricky. We're extremely fortunate. Akamai, at the senior most levels of the company, decided pretty early on in the pandemic that we wanted to do some research to understand where we felt like the future would be going. And then we instituted a program called FlexBase. And so about 96% of our employees have the option to work remotely. The last 4% are folks that are normally doing jobs that you truly can't imagine not being done in an office. So, janitorial staff, some sort of like unique technology that's only available in the office, but the vast majority of people have the option and do on any given day wind up working remotely, and it's a game changer for us in terms of acquiring talent. We've absolutely had people that have left other companies because their company said you need to come back, and they had moved 50, 100 miles away and said, I've got a life now, I'm not interested in going back, and so my job is not my life necessarily anymore. And at times, I think people are using this as a proxy for the culture overall. And so I've told you that I want to work remotely. You've seen me be incredibly productive over the past 2.5 to 3 years. So what's the intent to going back? And a lot of times the answer is kind of a masked version of, we don't quite trust you, right? We don't trust that you're working at home. We don't trust that you can create connections at home. We don't trust that you will continue to innovate the same way at home. And when you feel like your employer doesn't trust you, you will go to find an employer that does trust you. And so the other beautiful thing that we did as a part of FlexBase was to say we're making these decisions at the job level, not at the individual manager level. And so if you and I are both managing similar teams, you may be an incredibly effective leader that says, no, my people can work from home. I can check in on their productivity. I know what's going on. In another company, I may say, nope, I want my people to come into the office. And that creates variability, and it creates that degree of bias that we were discussing, because one leader says you need to come in, another another leader says you can work remotely, your experience is now heavily influenced by whom you report to. Whereas as an organization, we've said if this is your job, we've decided the vast majority of these jobs can be done remotely. So regardless of who your manager is, we're putting the obligation on the manager and on all of the employees to figure out how do I do my job productively, but not that you can mandate that I come back in or not.